I only have a few words of introduction, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Bologna and his students to basically share the rest of this presentation with you. My name is Scott Kight. I am a professor in the biology department, and I'm also associate dean in the College of Science and Mathematics. With us today are Dr. Paul Bologna, who is a professor in the Department of Biology. And we have four students who participated in this trip to the Galapagos that we're going to talk about. And some of them are graduated, some of them are graduate students, some of them are doing some very exciting things too. So I wanted to introduce briefly Ms. Caitlin Carrad, Mr. Gerard Nasser, Ms. Stephanie Ghetto, and Ms. Alora Blyce. And so they will be telling you all about their experiences and showing you some really cool pictures of what they got to do while they were down there. So Dr. B, if you could just advance the slide really quick. That's me, and I just wanted to share that what's the dean's office got to do with this. We worked with President Cole and Vice President and Provost Gingrich to make this happen. And in fact, Dr. Cole and Provost Gingrich actually went down to the Galapagos with the dean of our college, Dean Billings, and they met with the mayor of Puerto Arroyo, which is one of the main islands in the Galapagos. They met with the director of the Estación Científica Charles Darwin, the Charles Darwin Research Station, and we're very interested in developing research opportunities for our faculty and students down there, and certainly educational experiences like you're going to hear about today, where we can just take a class down there and just, there's no better way to immerse yourself in some of the most amazing biology and geology there is to be found on this planet than to go down there. And I wanted to confide one thing to the audience, and if Dr. B, if you could hit that next slide. I'm an evolutionary biologist, and I've taught evolutionary biology for the last 30 years, and so I have a secret to admit. I'm a Darwin fanboy, and so for me, going down to the Galapagos, and you can see some selfies there with me and Charles Darwin and various funny things, that was kind of like an Elvis fan going to Graceland. It was just the people of the Galapagos, know the importance of this scientist and the impact of this scientist on biology, modern science. And he is everywhere down there in their culture and in the way that they do ecotourism. So lots of fun selfie moments down there. And then Dr. B, if you could hit one more slide, I want to acknowledge Dr. Laura Billings, who is the Dean of the College of Science and Mathematics. And Dr. Billings was absolutely instrumental in forming these relationships, providing scholarship money for students to be able to afford to defray some of the costs to go down and do this, and just really held the ball on this initiative from the beginning to where we're at today. So I just want to acknowledge Dr. Billings. And with that, I would like to turn the program over to Professor Bologna and his students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So one, I just wanted to welcome all of the alumni and the friends of the university, because in many cases, as you have graduated and gone beyond, you have become and continue to be our friends as individuals. And it's a really great opportunity for me to be here. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Crummins, who you can see sort of in that picture above me. She was also instrumental in this trip and was my co-leader alongside there. So we were sort of partners in crime in actually doing this. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief sort of itinerary, if you will. I have been doing sort of field courses with students, leading them into the field for over 13 years here at Montclair. And it's been one of my personal missions to kind of do these kinds of things. We can call it experiential learning, or you can call it immersion therapy. I like to say that as a marine biologist, it was a trip like this that I took as an undergraduate that made me do what I do for a living. So just to give you kind of a feel for what we did along this particular trip, is that we landed down in mainland Ecuador, and then we had an opportunity to go to the Churut Mangrove Ecological Reserve. And it was really very fantastic to kind of see the big mangrove systems, and the students will give you a feel for it, and I've got some pictures to kind of go. And then sort of, from that point, then we headed over to the Galapagos, And on our way sort of through, we went to the giant tortoise reserve. You can see that's me standing up in one of the giant tortoises. That's one of the skill challenges that you have, is to climb into these giant carapaces and actually kind of do a little bit. And then we had a couple of different boat tours, one of which went to the Santa Fe Island, also known as the Nova boat tour. And so if you know what Spanish means for Nova, you'll understand that not all trips go as planned. And then we did a hike down to the Tortuga Bay region, where we had some great opportunities to interact with a lot of sea life, including baby hammerhead sharks. And then, of course, sort of a trip down to the Darwin Center, and ultimately a very nice boat trip to the Isla Bartoloma, that we got a really great opportunity to see some amazing things down there. And what I am going to do now is I'm going to sort of ask the 4 of our students that went on this trip to kind of give their sort of, personal reflections and some of the things that related to sort of our activities down there. So first to go off is Alora. She's a graduate, a former master student of ours. So Alora, I'll leave it to you, and you just tell me when to advance.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm a recent graduate, and I went to on this trip my last semester at Montclair, and this was actually like right before everything went wild here. So it was like a really great like introduction to craziness. But the trip was a lot of fun for us. So we got to visit a lot of different locations, including mainland Ecuador, which I think is also important to note, is that when we first arrived in Ecuador, we were in mainland Ecuador, and we stayed in Guayaquil. And there we got to do some really incredible things too. And actually one of my favorite things we got to do was go to a cocoa plantation, and we got to literally like roast the cocoa beans and like make hot chocolate and everything. And we got to learn a lot of like interesting things about plants that maybe you don't even think about. So like the cocoa plant, like it has this like white kind of fluffy coating around the beans, and you suck on it. It's like this sweet fruit. It's actually it was so cool. It's such like a unique experience. I really enjoyed that. And then they like take different parts of the plant and they make different products from it. So you learn about like the sustainability that goes into everything that they do on these plantations. So that was definitely an awesome perspective to gain. And then from there, we went to the Galapagos. So the picture on the right is when, after we landed at the airport, we had to take a boat ride to another island where we were staying. And the whole thing is like really interesting because the whole trip is kind of like island hopping. And so you're taking boats everywhere. And so like, whereas in this area, you might be driving everywhere, there you're taking boats everywhere. So it's a different kind of experience for daily life there. And it's interesting too, because you can see like so many different things. You notice is like, how did they get their food in? You'll see crates of food arriving on the islands and everything. So that was awesome. And then on the island where we were staying, so the picture on the left, they have like this whole strip of the island where it's like shopping centers and stores, and there's this like awesome statue of a tortoise where you can strike a pose. So you can advance the slide. These are just some of my really favorite pictures from the Galapagos, so, and also Ecuador. So the top left, that was the view from one of the islands. So that was a volcanic island. We took a hike up to the top, and that was the view from up there. And this is like probably my all-time favorite photo, just because the geology there was just so interesting. So you would just take anywhere you go, anywhere you look, everything is different. It's not anything you've seen, even perhaps on other trips you've taken. So it's very unique, and the water is very cool color, and it contrasts very deeply with like a lot of the volcanic nature of the island. So like you'll see like browns and blacks, but then right next to it will be this blue turquoise water. It's really awesome. On the upper right, this is, I mean, I'm just a nerd. This is the volcano cactus, and this was actually one of my favorite things to see on the Galapagos Islands because they're endemic specifically to this island. They don't exist anywhere else. So it's just like being in the one spot where something exists is really interesting. And then there's this park in Guayaquil, so the bottom left. So Guayaquil is in the mainland of Ecuador, and they have an iguana park where just the iguanas have kind of come to love the humans for their food. And so they let you take pretty pictures of them, and you can even pet them. Some of them are pretty cool with that, or hold them. And they're really beautiful. And so we were able to get some really cool pictures just because of those relationships that the iguanas had formed with the people there. And of course, there's a very cute sea lion. And I'm in marine science, so like anytime we were on a boat, I was just like the happiest person. So that was a really awesome trip. And you definitely learn a lot, not just about the science and the landscape. You learn a lot about different culture, which is always a great perspective to gain. Like I was, for example, not prepared really for like equatorial heat. I just, but everybody there, they're prepared for it, and you can see it in like the way they dress and everything. I was not personally prepared for that. I was like, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to wear my summer clothes. No, you have to cover up. So yeah.
Okay, we'll move on here now to Caitlin.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin Carrad. Like Laura, I recently graduated with my master's, but instead of marine and coastal sciences, mine was in molecular biology. And this was just like an overall amazing trip. Like Laura said before, we first landed in mainland Ecuador, and one of the first things you can see here is me taking a selfie with an iguana. That was like one of the coolest things that we could have possibly done. Basically, they had a park, and it was just filled with iguanas, and they were just hanging out, and you could just take selfies with them, and they were pretty photogenic. They did not care about people whatsoever, so it was pretty great. One of the next photos you can see over here is one of the marine iguanas when we went to the Galapagos, just hanging out on a bridge. Literally wildlife, as soon as we got to Ecuador and as soon as we got to the Galapagos, was literally everywhere. You basically got immersed as soon as you stepped foot into the island or the mainland. And one of the next things you can see down here is a little Sally light-footed crab, which was in the mangroves. And they basically live in the mud and in the dirt and eat the foliage that falls down on the ground. And they were pretty cool because, again, they're endemic to this certain area. So it was very interesting to see like the wildlife and what's basically occurring there only in this small little area. So can you advance to the next slide, Dr. B? Thank you. And as I said before, these are again some of my favorite pictures that I took while in the Galapagos. So again, a lovely iguana just hanging out on a tree. You could get like pretty close. They are pretty, the people there are pretty protective over the wildlife, so you can get pretty close, but they want you to give the animal space because they don't want you to interfere with its natural habitat basically, and they basically want you to respect the animal. So this is me pretty close, but I also zoomed in very much to get this shot. You can also see this lovely cactus finch here off on the side. That was when from one of our hikes in Tortuga Bay. Again, we walked down this really long path and they were literally everywhere. And they had beautiful cactus and like Alora, I was not built for Ecuadorian heat. So it was very interesting and unintentional to like go into this beautiful habitat, which was scorchingly hot, but it was kind of amazing. You can see here prime and center is one of the tortoises that is famous for that's famous in the Galapagos, and they were just hanging out. This was from the tortoise reserve, and they have them separated by age and species. just so they can keep the population thriving, basically. And then at the bottom, you can see this lovely fish just hanging out. This was from one of our many snorkeling adventures. I believe this one was also, we had the opportunity after we hiked the volcano, like Laura mentioned before, we had the opportunity afterwards to snorkel right off the volcano and look at the beautiful marine life. So it was just one of those things where you got immersed into this beautiful habitat and immersed into where these animals are and where they're endemic to, and be able to really appreciate how beautiful the habitat is, and how well preserved this habitat is as well.
Alrighty, thank you. So Stephanie, you want to chime in now?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie. I am a second year graduate student in the ecology and evolution concentration. Not only was it amazing to visit basically the birthplace of evolutionary theory as it stands, but we also got to go, and I really wanted to mention this, we got to go with two brilliant scientists, which really enhanced our experience. So not only were we getting tours from the amazing locals that live on the Galapagos, but we got to go with two professors who could really enhance our experience with their own knowledge. This first picture on the top left here, that was at the reserve where the giant tortoises just meander around all day. It was very awesome. I wanted to mention here, Caitlin showed you a picture of a giant tortoise that actually looks very different from the one that I'm pictured with here. So I wanted to mention, as Alora said, the different islands on the Galapagos, they look very different from each other. Some are very green and vegetative and lush, and there's more moisture. And some of them look like the middle of the Mojave Desert. When we landed, immediately the airport, the island that the airport is on, it kind of looks like Mars. It's very sparse, very red. So the differences in the giant tortoises that you can see in the Galapagos are actually reflected in the differences of the island habitats. This tortoise that I'm with right here has a domed shell. They typically inhabit the islands with more lush vegetation, like you can see in this picture. They're lower to the ground because the food is relatively abundant there for them. The tortoise that Caitlin showed you they are referred to as the saddleback tortoises. They have much higher shells and longer legs. And if you actually look at the top part of the shell, it looks like the pommel area of a horse saddle, which is why they're called saddlebacks. They actually populate the islands that are more desert-like. The vegetation is more sparse, so they have longer necks and longer legs to allow them to reach vegetation that may be higher up, because they're not living in these lush lands like the domed tortoises, who don't really need to reach higher vegetation. So I thought that was really cool. I didn't realize that that sort of diversity within, the same species could exist. The second picture is just my selfie with one of the many marine animals that we saw. And it was actually incredible because of all the protections in the area of the Galapagos, these animals are not used to seeing humans as a threat. They're not skittish. They don't mind us. They've never really been given a reason to be afraid of humans. So they're very habituated to our presence. So it was very alarming to get to see this type of wildlife up close. It was an incredible experience. Probably my favorite thing I did wasn't one of our grand tours that we had. The bottom right picture of that leafcutter ant, this was before we had actually gotten to the Galapagos. This was on mainland Ecuador, and we were about to go on a tour in Chirut, the ecological preserve there in the rainforest. And just behind the bus, while we were waiting for our tour guide, there was this stone wall, and I looked down and I see an entire colony of these ants holding little scraps of leaves, and suddenly I felt like I was dropped into a National Geographic documentary. It was incredible. I've seen these things in documentaries, in zoos, and it was just amazing to glance down and see something like that. It's truly an experience that is unlike any other. And then probably my second favorite thing was just snorkeling around the various waters. We saw sharks, we saw tons of starfish, a lot of fish. I mean, it was just amazing to be immersed by the incredible biodiversity of the islands, and truly the best thing I've done.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
No, you're
I just
okay.
flipped early. Gerard?
Hi, yeah, so I'm Gerard Nasser. I'm a second year master's student in biology. So I got to agree with Steph right off the bat. Dr. Bologna and Dr. Crumans did bring the trip to a whole new level with the knowledge that they brought when they came with us, and I appreciate them a lot for it. So what I loved about this trip was this was the most that I've ever gotten to actually experience what I'm learning in the classroom outside of a lab. So that was very fun for me. So as you can see, I have a couple photos, both me and Steph. If you look on the right of the screen, so the top is when we're on the boat ride going, it was the very first boat ride that we did around Santa Fe, I'm pretty sure. And part of it was the boat ride took us to what was called Hidden Beach. It was a beach that was surrounded by mangroves, and the only way you could get there was by boat. And you could see us swimming around that beach and me barely staying above the water. That was a fun time for me because I actually did get a little sick on that boat ride, the first one. And then there's me coming out of the water. But like we all said, eventually I learned. The heat was a lot, but I covered up. And that's a photo with the geology in the background of when we were climbing the volcanic island. It was Bartolome. And I gotta, like, once you reach the top of that, they had a little marker so you knew you were at the top. Those views were just stunning. It was amazing just to be able to see everything around you in so many different ways. And it was a great moment to just stand there and just, next slide, please. Yeah, so these were some of the wildlife and plants that we got to see. So when we were, if you look at the top left of the slide, when we were snorkeling, in outside the island of Bartolome, that is a blue pyramid starfish, sea star rather, blue pyramid sea star that it was like kind of crouched under a rock. And I actually passed it at first. I didn't even see it initially, but then I went back because I thought I saw a sergeant fish. And when I looked, it was just hiding right under there. And that was one of the things with the wildlife, just the variety of colors that you saw. When you saw the marine wildlife, when you looked at wildlife on the land, I was just taken aback. It was just so beautiful. In the center next to it is a yellow warbler that we saw when we were initially on the islands and we went to the first tortoise reserve. It was kind of just hanging out there, and I thought the yellow color was beautiful. I'm very much because I don't do a lot of ecology work and things like that. So when I get to see these things, it gets me very excited because it's almost like a first time a lot for me. At the bottom is like the bottom left, that's a blue-footed booby. We saw that off Santa Fe when our boat was passing through. So we were going from the first snorkeling point to the second snorkeling point. And as we were passing, it was just way off sitting on that rock. And I was very excited when I got this photo because I wasn't sure the zoom on my camera would reach it because we were so far away. Unfortunately, that was the only one I did see on this trip, but it was still awesome. And then next to it is some of the mangroves that we got to see when we were going. These are on the beaches of Tortuga Bay, and that we got to see them. So that was pretty cool. And then the last photo I have on the top right, that's a ghost crab that was found on Tortuga Bay. And I didn't actually know initially that was a ghost crab at first when I took a picture of it. But as I was talking with our guide, me and Steph, we noticed as we're walking around, there was like a bunch of pellets of sand like surrounding little holes, and we were confused what that was. And he was telling us that the ghost crabs, what they do is they like dig in and they'll filter the sand to like get like any algae or microorganisms or things like that out of the sand on the beaches, and then spit the sand out. So that way they get what they want, spit out the sand. And that's why you have those like bunch of pellets and like trails of sand. And so that was really cool to learn and make that connection.
Tony, thank you. I really want to thank all of our students. One, they made it tremendously valuable to me as an instructor to kind of go. So I'm going to kind of finish up here. I know we've only got a couple of minutes, and hopefully we can maybe do a little additional sort of Q&A. And part of what really, to me, makes this an amazing place is aspects of its sort of geological history. There's both hotspots there. It's also the place where there's a tremendous amount of plate tectonics, so there's a lot of shifting and moving of the crustal plates. There's subductions going on, and there's sinkholes that are in the middle of the cities and the middle of these mountainous areas, and you can see all of these intrusions. In the center upper part, you can see a big giant lava cave from the active volcanic activity that's still going on there. And so for anybody, it's a really incredible place. This is also the area that the hydrothermal vents were first sort of seen back in the late 1970s, and that kind of changed a tremendous amount of our view of sort of origin of life concepts after those were located. So near the surface, you have sort of like the cradle of evolution, and at the seafloor, you have sort of the cradle of potential life from a theory perspective. But again, this concept of this incredible life is really wonderful. So in particular, on the bottom left, that is one of the Galapagos penguins, which is again an endemic species, and it is the only penguin species that occurs at the equator or anywhere near. Alora talked about sort of the volcano cactuses, again, one of my personal favorites, and the upper right is one of these Sally Lightfoot crabs that are sort of endemic within the region. And below water, certainly as a marine scientist, you know, this is a big thing of pencil urchins up above, and, you know, damselfish that were, you know, not camera shy. And then sort of, you know, this interaction that we see. So the blue-footed booby is sort of this classic species, as well as the marine iguanas. In the upper right, you can see a lava lizard. So this reptilian diversity is incredible on the Galapagos Island, and these species are found nowhere else. The same way as that this is what's called the Galapagos seal, even though it's technically an eared seal, so it's more related to the sea lions. And then just like Caitlin pointed out, here's one of the cactus finches, and clearly sort of the Galapagos finches are something that we really think about all the time in terms of sort of the life part. And then, you know, Alora talked about sort of the cocoa farm, and so you can sort of see the central bottom picture there of us roasting up the cocoa beans. But one of the other part that nobody failed to talk about was the fact that in the Chirrut mangrove, they also have a very large howler monkey population. And so we were able to get some incredible photographs. I happened to do the crazy thing, which was to record one of them calling and then play it back as loud as I could on my phone. And we had sort of a three-way where three large males were coming in close and kind of yelling at each other and howling. And we were really able to get some fantastic photos and some really wonderful interactions with plantation workers, with our guides, to see some absolutely amazing things. And then one of the big things at the Darwin Center, you can see in the upper center where you've got little number 45, sort of an active breeding program. Some of the problems that are happening right now in the Galapagos are a variety of invasive species that are devastating natural populations. So there are insects that are impacting many of the bird species and actually sort of killing off the offspring so that, you know, they can't get through there. Fire ants have been introduced, and so very small tortoises, very early ones, essentially fall prey to them. So the captive breeding program at the Darwin Center is a very critical component And it's sort of a not to be missed thing where you can see all of the different versions, the saddlebacks, as well as the dome tortoises, in sort of very small all the way up to their very large adult sizes.
Dr. B, we have there's just 2 points of that I wanted to bring up really quick. First of all, we are at the end of our program time, so I understand some people have to go now. But we do have some outstanding questions if people want to hang around for a few more minutes. And one of the questions that I think is easier for Dr. B to address verbally rather than chatting in the window was about the invasive species that are encroaching on the ecosystem. Do you have any thoughts about the conservation efforts down there?
Well, in some cases, they're absolutely horrible. So they've got blackberries that are taking over all over the place. And it's really problematic because it kind of chokes out the native vegetation. And then they have guavas growing all over the place. Guavas are a two-edged sword because, yes, they're invasive, they're taking over, but the giant tortoises love them. And in fact, when they're feeding heavily on the guava, they produce more offspring, they grow faster. So, it's an invasive species, but at the same point, it actually improves the conservation status of the tortoises. So, yes, we don't want them, but they kind of do a positive thing. In general, invasive species are not good. And in particular, when you fly over from the mainland over there, they literally fumigate the compartments. So as you are flying, the flight attendants open the overhead compartments and spray insecticides throughout the cabin to kill any potential insect that might be coming from the mainland. So all of these are really critical. The one thing that I do want to kind of just point out here, I know that that's Caitlin, but right in the background on the bottom right, you can see those are some of those Galapagos penguins. So in the snorkeling, you can literally kind of rise right up onto them and see them in their wild habitat. And I think that that was one of my favorite things that I got to see personally and that I got to share with the students. And again, these are sort of all about students. One thing I might throw out to you is that, maybe there's an opportunity to generate alumni type trips like this. Because we like to share these experiences with our current students and with our former students. So, maybe sometime in the future, through the university or something along there, as we build our relationships with the Darwin Center and with these organizations, there might be some great opportunities. I know that there was a couple questions about, if I go, what should I see? So maybe we'll have some opportunities in the future. And thank you. And I will sort of stop the share at this point. And thank you guys all for attending this one. And I don't know if in the chat line there's some things going on there, but we're happy to kind of field any additional questions that you've got.
Thank you, Dr. Bologna. And absolutely, we'll stick around for a few minutes. If you have any more questions for us, just drop them in the chat window. Also, I want to thank the people who organized homecoming today and gave us this opportunity. I want to thank the alumni who joined us today and the students who are currently here, and then, of course, all of our guests. And I want to acknowledge that I mentioned in the introduction that there were some scholarship funds that were provided to the students to help them be able to afford to go on this trip. And those are from generous donations from our alumni and our friends. And so for those of you who are in attendance today who do generously provide gifts to Montclair State University, it's your gifts that make this possible. So thank you very much for that support. Let's see, Dr. Brackfeld has provided a geology interlude in the Q&A. Size of an island generated a hotspot is controlled by the vigor of the volcanic eruption occurring under the Earth's crust and how quickly the tectonic plate moves over the top of the eruption. What is exposed above sea level also changes as the plate carries the islands into deeper water. Thank you, Dr. Brackfeld. Dr. Brackfeld, by the way, is a geologist. She's also an associate dean and a professor of Earth and Environmental Studies here at Montclair State, and also takes students on some very exciting trips. Some of them research, some of them going down to the Antarctic to study some amazing things that happen in the sediments at the bottom of the ocean down there. And then Kathleen Pierre asks, do you think independent assortment occurs on the Galapagos Island? Independent assortment. Dr. B, any thoughts on that? Independent assortment.
Is that in the, oh, this is the open questions? Sorry.
Yeah, these are in the Q&A.
I guess I'm not sure I know what independent assortment really means. I don't know what the question is asking me. I know that that sounds a little crazy. In some cases, it may be that there are sort of lineages within islands that actually are diverging from one another. So I'm not sure whether that's the approach, so that within individual islands, those tortoises in particular show a lot of isolation because they really can't get from one island to the next. We know that they were sort of very close to each other during different times when sea level was higher and lower. So there might have been some cross movement that allows it. So I guess I'm not sure I know that I've answered your question correctly, Kathleen. I know there was one about the long hikes and that they've been to St. John's. I love St. John's. I used to take students there for a really long time until Hurricane Maria actually took out the marine station where I stay. The biggest long hike that we had was out to Tortuga Bay. And I think part of our problem on that one is that we were trying to do that and then the Darwin Center. And so it was kind of like rush the whole time. And I think that that made it a lot more challenging because it's, middle of the day, the sun is baking down on you. And we just kind of felt like you almost had to jog from one spot to the other, as opposed to walk, take a break, see the wonderful wildlife that's around you. So we were kind of on a schedule. After sort of leading this tour, I know the mistakes that I made on feeling rushed. I would have loved to have had a lot more time at just Tortuga Bay to just enjoy the water that's were around there and just do that alone. And then on a separate day, go to the Darwin Center and have more time there to sort of see the things and interact and sort of do more exploring along those lines.
We have a question from Flo in the chat. How do we balance the need to educate with the need not to disrupt the ecosystem? That's actually a really good question. Dr. B and students, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. The great thing about the Galapagos is they're really preserve the environment focus. So they want to bring in tourists and they want to generate money for the island so that they can sustain some of the programs that they have. But they're they really want to protect the environment because a lot of the species there are endemic. So, and that's one of the things that brings tourists to the islands. For example, they have the tortoise breeding program, and you have the blue-footed boobies, and we have the penguins that are endemic to the islands. These are only found in those specific locations. So they do a lot of ecotourism in the sense that most of the money that they get from people who come and visit the islands goes right back into preserving the environment there. So it goes right into the tortoise breeding program, or it goes into putting in sustainable energy for the island, or it goes back into different programs like the Darwin Center to help educate the populace about some of these endemic creatures and the habitats that are there.
One of the other things to point out is that, one, it's monitored, and there's only a limited number of people that actually are sort of allowed to travel. So they have sort of like caps on total tourism to minimize that actually going into the park. And then when you're sort of within those boundaries, in general, you will have a guide who you've got to pay for the day to kind of lead you to these different areas. So most of the tour groups and the tour guides, you're really kind of working with somebody who is local, and that limits sort of where you go and sort of what your access points are. And that really sort of minimizes sort of, whether or not you're trampling on a plant that you have no idea whether or not it's a native or an invasive. So there's a fair amount of that, but every year there's a desperate desire to have more tourism and more people, and you're just going to have more conflicts kind of going through. If you live there, if you accidentally hit a tortoise, you might be headed to jail for a really long time if they happen to be crossing the road, whether it's a small one or a large one. So they also have legislation and laws specifically protecting those species.
I could also comment on this. I think also that there's especially with things going on right now, a good way to educate without being there is through these virtual platforms where we can share our experiences and our photos. And I know that that's not the same as being there, but that does help. If you can't get there and there's a limit on the tourism, it is really great to hear others' experiences and see the photos. So there is no damaging effect without, you know, if you're not there, you're just kind of virtually experiencing it.
So Dr. Kight, there was a question in the written one.
Yep.
Oh, did you just answer it?
I just answered it in the chat, but yeah, that was, we now got what we were after with the independent assortment. We were talking about the question was more about the divergent evolution of species on the different islands. And that's a really good question. That's actually one of the things that, that sort of shaped Darwin's thinking about the way that life evolves and changes, having gone to the, and something to note is he was only there a few weeks, but noticed some very interesting things, like each island has a unique species of groundfinch on it. Each island has a unique species of tortoise on it. Each island has a unique species of mockingbird on it, which seems odd because they've all got basically the same climate. They're all islands. And yet these things were uniquely different species. And so, but yet still very similar to one another, and more similar to one another than any other kinds of animals like that on other parts of the planet. And so that was one of the things that led Darwin to conclude that they must have had a common ancestor, and then radiated into different species on the different islands over time as they were separate from one another, you know, by not very far, if you think about it. So that, yeah, so I think that's where that question was going, Dr. B.
It's good to have an evolutionary biologist sitting up top next to you to help you out with those questions.
All right. So it doesn't look like we have any other outstanding questions, and I know people probably want to attend other events in homecoming today. So again, thank you everyone who joined us today. At one point, I think we had 40-some people listening in, which is very exciting for us to have a chance to share this experience with so many people. I want to thank Dr. Bologna again today for doing this with us. I want to absolutely thank our students and our alumni who joined us to give this presentation today. Those of you, I know a lot of you are alumni and students, but I am always so proud of the amazing students that come through our programs, and just to listen to your insights today, you know, really does us so proud at Montclair State University. We really do have the best students in the whole world. So thank you for joining us. And everyone have a great day. Enjoy homecoming. And we will probably be seeing you again in future presentations about the things we do in CSAM. So have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.